We believe that we need to have fundamental change to get
all of that later in our video library at cspan.org. We'll leave now briefly and take you to the U.S. House. They're coming in for a brief session back at 3 for more work on transportation.
Let us pray. Eternal God, through whom we see what we could be and what we can become, thank you for giving us another day. In these days, our nation is faced with pressing issues of conscience, constitutional, religious, and personal rights, and matters of great political importance. We thank you that so many Americans have been challenged and have risen to the exercise of their responsibilities as citizens to participate in the great debates of these days. Grant wisdom, knowledge, and understanding to us all, as well as an extra measure of charity. Send your Spirit upon the members of this people's house who walk through this valley under public scrutiny. Give them peace and Solomonic prudence in their deliberations. And may all that is done this day be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona rise?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal.
Questions on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the Journal. Those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. Opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The Journal stands approved.
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Arizona.
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the grounds that a quorum is not present and make the point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. From Texas, Mr. Poe will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Chair will entertain up to a 15 one-minute request on each side. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, religious liberty is under attack by the administration. The right of religious liberty is guaranteed in the First Amendment of the Constitution because it is a foundation for other rights. Yet the administration is forcing religious organizations to violate their conscience by indirectly providing their employees with services that trample on those religious beliefs. The administration's so-called promise of accommodation changes nothing. It is just political word games. The issue is not about contraception. This is an issue about religious liberty. It affects not just Catholics, but many religions and individuals of faith. Regardless of where Americans stand on the issue of contraception, sterilization, or the morning after pill, it should be alarming to all who believe the government should not persecute religion or substitute a government secular doctrine to its citizens. The Constitution does not accommodate for religious liberty. It demands it, whether this administration likes it or not. And that's just the way it is.
Time of the gentleman's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
To address this House for 1 minute, the gentleman asks unanimous consent.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking directly to the American people today.
I know, I heard.
To all families who are burdened by student loan debt, a solution is on the way. I'm working on bills that will responsibly forgive certain student loans and provide every student loan borrower with basic consumer protections by enacting a student loan borrower Bill of Rights. I urge every member of Congress to help our American families get out of this debt so they can live better lives and create jobs for America. I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from South Carolina seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute. Revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, for 3 years, Americans have watched the President as he's tried to borrow and spend his way out of an economic recession. His failed policies have failed this nation, with unemployment still over 8%. The Washington Examiner stated, quote, "What this country needs is an honest leader who will tell the truth about our entitlement spending crisis and identify real reforms." But Obama's latest budget does none of that. Instead, he offers double doses of deficits, tax hikes, and crony capitalism. America deserves better, end of quote. Over the past year, House Republicans have passed dozens of pieces of legislation that decrease spending, provide tax cuts, and encourage job creation through private sector job growth. I urge the President and the Liberal Senate to work with House Republicans to support legislation that promotes jobs. In conclusion, God bless our troops, and we will never forget September 11th and the global war on terrorism.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York seek recognition? Does the gentlelady ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute? And gentlelady is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, from Buffalo to Rochester, New York, people in my district want to get back to work. They just need the opportunity. That's why during budget hearings yesterday with the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Homeland Security, I posed the question, can our government be doing more to make sure that our limited federal procurement dollars are being spent on jobs and manufacturing right back here in America? The answer is yes. They want to work with us, and we need to work together to make more of our limited dollars spent in companies that have a higher percentage of the American workforce right here, making our defense systems and our products for the Department of Homeland Security. So my policy is to give more preferences to those businesses based on the percentage of workers in America. We need to have a policy that's going to reward those companies and not penalize them. We need to create more opportunities for manufacturing right here in America and in my district in upstate New York. So I look forward to working collaboratively. I'm going to introduce legislation that I expect to be bipartisan in nature. So who could not agree that we could do more to make it in America? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks for 1 minute.
Does the gentleman ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend his remarks? Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When small businesses compete for government contracts, two things happen. One, the government saves billions of dollars, and thousands of private sector jobs are created through these investments. However, the process of contracting can be needlessly time-consuming and onerous for small businesses to navigate. Last year, the federal government failed to meet the requirement for contracts awarded to small businesses. This complicated procurement procedure is hindering job creation and slowing our economic recovery. Last week, I introduced, along with my colleague, Representative Judy Chu from California, H.R. 3985, the Building Better Business Partnership Act. H.R. 3985 focuses on improving and streamlining mentor-protege programs which pair new businesses looking to increase their government contracts with more experienced businesses. My bill will make mentor-protege programs more efficient and successful by placing the SBA in charge of overseeing and setting standards for programs based on what we know works. Ultimately, H.R. 3985 will make it easier for small business firms to compete. With that, I yield back.
His time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Does the gentleman wish to revise and extend his remarks?
I do not.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
We're at a crossroad in America where we must decide if we're going to continue building economic recovery on the backs of middle and low-income families, or whether we're going to ask wealthy Americans to join in the sacrifice by paying their fair share. Too many Americans have already made sacrifices to aid our slow-moving economy and reduce the deficit. The military had to scale back. Federal workers had to take a pay freeze. Health care providers had to take a pay cut. But we have not required those who can actually afford it to share in the sacrifice. Changing our nation's tax policies is not about redistribution of wealth. It's about fairness, doing what's best for the American people. If those who can't afford it don't make the sacrifice, the survival of America will be affected. The President's budget will ensure that those who have been blessed with a portfolio that has multiplied under the Bush tax cuts will no longer be the primary beneficiaries of tax cuts and policy. I urge my colleagues to insist that all Americans, including the rich, share the pain of this recovery.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I ask consent to address the House for 1 minute to advise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the President released his budget for next year. It fails to reduce the national debt by 1 penny. That's why it's already being called debt on arrival. Under this budget, for the 4th consecutive year, our nation's deficit will be measured in the trillions of dollars. Let me repeat that. For 4 consecutive years, trillions of dollars in deficits. Failure to address our mounting debt crisis puts us on the same course as Greece. We need to act, and act now. Repeating the reckless spending patterns of the past defines common sense. It's time for Washington to make the tough choices necessary to balance the budget for taxpayers today and future generations. The American people deserve nothing less.
Time of the gentleman's expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from the American Samoa seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, the catchword is innovation. President Obama has made it clear that on the road to economic recovery, we must also make long-term investments in American innovation. In his FY 2013 budget proposal, President Obama reasserted his commitment to an agenda that supports startups and small businesses where new jobs are created. President Obama proposed to expand tax relief while eliminating regulations that prevent aspiring entrepreneurs from getting the financing that is needed to grow. The President's budget also calls for a $2.2 billion investment to support advanced manufacturing research and development programs to assist our business community throughout the country. President Obama's budget also creates a manufacturing capacity for vital defense technologies and dramatically improves production and distribution of manufactured goods. Mr. Speaker, I commend President Obama for his commitment in keeping America the global frontrunner in innovation. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week, the President sent his fiscal year 2013 budget request to Congress. It's been roundly panned as being not serious, inadequate, and political. But, Mr. Speaker, I want the American people to understand, in addition to all of these assessments, the President's budget request is downright dangerous. House Republicans have begun a serious conversation with the American people about our debt, our out-of-control federal spending, the unsustainability of mandatory spending, as well as our future. But it's past time for this President and his party in Congress to join us in honestly acknowledging the real challenges facing our nation and offering realistic solutions to put America back on the path to prosperity to ensure that our best days are still in front of us. Sadly, the President's lack of leadership on these critical issues endangers not only the current economic recovery, but the very future of our great republic. I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Massachusetts seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, the health care reform effort signed into law by President Obama in 2010 contains important new benefits for our seniors and Medicare recipients that have already started to take effect. Nearly 3.6 million seniors in the donut hole have already saved $2.1 billion on their prescription drugs. 24 million people with Medicare have already taken advantage of free preventative services. Additional reforms, such as a prohibition of lifetime caps on insurance expenditures, will soon be made available to our seniors thanks to health care reform. Nothing in health reform reduces Medicare benefits for seniors. Health care reform achieves Medicare savings by cracking down on inefficiency, fraud, and waste in Medicare, targeted at private health insurance companies and providers, not beneficiaries. This is how government should operate, by demanding efficiency, accountability, and protecting taxpayer dollars. Thank you, and I yield back.
The lady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Arizona seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask the President to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, in just this past year, approximately 79,000 pages of regulations were printed in the Federal Register. The cost to comply with our regulatory enterprise exceeds $1 trillion per year. Now, this past August, the Department of Labor issued its final rule governing the non-displacement of qualified workers under service contracts. Under this rule, when a government contract is given to a new firm, the company is required to first offer employment to the previous contractor's workers. The administration claims this rule will help government efficiency, but it gives a preference to union employees and limits the ability of the firm to negotiate and hire the workers that it actually wants. This rule will impact thousands of employers and billions in government contracting. By piling on new hoops for employers to jump through, we are simply increasing costs that are passed on to taxpayers. Regulatory compliance costs are a hidden tax borne by us all. The administration must stop this myriad of job-killing regulations, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of American Heart Month. February, you know, is not just about Valentine's Day, but it's also a month designated to raise awareness of heart disease, especially its impact and effects on women. Heart disease is the #1 cause of death for women. And most Americans, including over 90% of primary care physicians, are not even aware that heart disease kills more women each year than men. You know, we have lost far too many of our loved ones to heart disease. I dare say each of us knows someone, a dear friend or a family member affected by it. And that's why I reintroduced H.R. 3526, the Heart for Women Act, to increase awareness of and access to care for those impacted by heart disease. I encourage my co-sponsors to co-sponsor this legislation and join me in the battle against heart disease. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Consent to address House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, why do we say that the President's health care law is a government takeover? Because under the law, the government can force religious organizations to violate their conscience. Because under the law, the Independent Payment Advisory Board can cut Medicare reimbursements without the consent of Congress. This same board could start running with minimal congressional oversight given the President's attempt to broaden the definition of a recess. It is a government takeover because the minimum essential benefits package will effectively dictate the level of coverage for every health care plan in the nation. It is a government takeover because the United States Preventive Services Task Force will determine what services have to be provided without any copayment. Finally, when the government can force you to purchase a service that it firmly controls, it's a government takeover. The list could go on and on. Clearly, the federal government is now in the driver's seat. The President's health care law is already failing, which is why we need to end it before it's fully implemented. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute and provide instead.
Gentleman asks unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
I do.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, on March 1, Medicare physician payments will be slashed by 27%, badly impacting seniors' access to health care. We must act now to make sure that doesn't happen. A few months ago, I had the opportunity to speak to World War II veterans from Missouri who visited Washington to see the memorial to their service. They spoke to me about how during their crisis, Americans pulled together to meet the great challenges of their time. That's the can-do attitude we need now. We should stop using the lives and health of our seniors as political bargaining chips. Plain and simple, paying doctors for doing their job, keeping seniors access to health care should not be a partisan issue. It should be an American value we can all rally around. I call on my colleagues to work together to keep access to Medicare services strong. That's an American value.
Has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend our
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Yes, sir.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, a year or two ago, some local bureaucrat in Oregon shut down a 7-year-old girl's lemonade stand because she had not paid $120 required to get a restaurant license. The bureaucrat's supervisor defended the action because some government officials will never admit a mistake. Fortunately, elected officials got the action rescinded and let the little girl operate her lemonade stand. I thought about this when I heard that Big Brother had struck once again by not allowing a 4-year-old girl in North Carolina to eat the lunch she had brought to school from home because supposedly it did not meet federal guidelines. The little girl had brought a very healthy lunch, a turkey and cheese sandwich, a banana, chips, and apple juice. Instead, she ate 3 chicken nuggets, apparently okayed by the government, and the school sent a bill for the lunch to her mother. This is the big government nanny state run amok. This was not only ridiculous and excessive, it was cruel to tell a 4-year-old child the lunch her mother had sent was bad or not proper. Plus, the little girl went home hungry. We seem to have, Mr. Speaker, a government of, by, and for the bureaucrats instead of one that is of, by, and for the people. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the minority leader seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House in relationship to the transportation bill that we are currently debating in the House this week. Transportation, as you know, has traditionally been and historically been an idea where our two parties have been able to find common ground. Transportation has been an opportunity for Republicans and Democrats alike to work to rebuild America, to create jobs, strengthen our economy, move commerce, move people, improve the quality of life, including public safety. That is up until now, and that is until this bill. With the legislation that we are debating today, Republicans put forward the most partisan transportation package in 50 years. It is not just partisan, it's bad for our nation, destroying more than 500,000 American jobs. The transportation bill is supposed to be a job-creating bill. It always has been, until now. Destroying more than 500,000 jobs, cutting highway investments in 45 states, bankrupting the Highway Trust Fund with a $78 billion shortfall, and just the strangest of all, among many short-sighted, harmful provisions in the bill, I want to make particular mention of what it does to public transportation. It eliminates all of the dedicated funding for public transportation, leaving millions of riders already faced with service cuts and fare increases out in the cold. The legislation is so detrimental to our nation that the Secretary of Transportation, Ray LaHood, a former member of this body on the Republican side of the aisle, has said, "This is the most partisan transportation bill that I have ever seen, and it is also the most anti-safety bill I have ever seen. It hollows out our #1 priority, which is safety, and frankly, it hollows out the guts of transportation efforts that have been for about the last 3 years. It's the worst transportation bill," Secretary LaHood, former Republican member of Congress, said, "that I have seen in the 35 years of my public service." In recommending that the President veto this legislation, the administration has said it would make America's roads, rails, and transit systems less safe, reduce the transportation options available to America's traveling public, short-circuit local decision-making, and turn back the clock on environmental and labor protections. Mr. Speaker, this is so unfortunate because it's so out of character with the American way, the common sense of the American people about what we should be doing for them. At the beginning of our country, Thomas Jefferson, when he was president, he enlisted his cabinet officers to build an infrastructure plan for America that involved transportation. In 2008, this plan, under Secretary Gallatin, the Secretary of Treasury, was put forth. It recognized that we had made the Louisiana Purchase, that there were Lewis and Clark expeditions going on, and that we had to build America, build roads and transportation out into these territories so that people would move there, commerce would develop, our country would be strong. Following this, the Erie Canal, the Transcontinental Railroad, the Cumberland Road, they were all built after the War of 1812. Of course, the Continental Railroad later than that, when our population was sparse, and so was our national treasury. In my own community of San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge and the San Francisco Bay Bridge. Both were built 75 years ago in the midst of the Great Depression. President Eisenhower, in the late 50s, the mid to late 50s, time of not a good economic time either, he built and instituted the interstate highway system, unifying our country. It was a national security issue to unify our country. And it was done at a time when our coffers were low on money, but it created jobs. It did what it was intended to do. And now we are abdicating our responsibility. Again, 200 years ago, Thomas Jefferson. 100 years later, Teddy Roosevelt. And his initiative for infrastructure centered around our national park system and how we make that part of our natural patrimony, and some of that falls under the Transportation Subcommittee of the Congress of the United States. And now here we are 100 years later, putting forth a bill that loses jobs, diminishes public safety. It's a missed opportunity, and it's no wonder our Republican colleagues are having so much trouble building support for it in their own caucus. I just wanted to take a moment to share my views with our colleagues about how wrong this is for the future and how out of keeping it is with our great past, which has seen the strength of our country grow because of our investments in our infrastructure and our bringing people together through transportation. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, for the fourth year in a row, of course, President Obama's budget fails to seriously address our nation's debt crisis and calls for higher taxes and increased stimulus spending. This budget punishes small businesses, job creators, and seniors at the expense of the administration's spending addiction. This is not a recipe for long-term economic growth. Instead, we need credible solutions that simplify the tax code, control federal spending, and preserve valuable services for our seniors. Washington should create a win-win situation for all Americans. The House continues to take these steps with jobs bill after jobs bill that will put people back to work and allow job creators and entrepreneurs to grow. Unfortunately, the President's budget spends too much, taxes too much, borrows too much, and picks the winners and losers of our economic recovery. This is not what America needs right now. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Puerto Rico seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, as a territory, Puerto Rico has always been treated unequally under federal health programs. While the Affordable Care Act improved the island's treatment under Medicaid, a number of key inequalities remain under both Medicaid and Medicare. Today, I am reintroducing legislation to eliminate a provision in federal law that requires Medicare to reimburse Puerto Rico hospitals far less than stateside hospitals. Under the current system, Puerto Rico hospitals are paid a base rate that is about 13% lower than the base rate for hospitals in the states. Thus, an island hospital will receive substantially less than any stateside hospital for providing the same services, making it harder for island hospitals to deliver high-quality care. This is another example of how the people of Puerto Rico are placed at a clear disadvantage in the race of life because of the island's territory status. I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will support my bill. I yield back the balance of my time.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise it.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this month I met with the executive director of the not-for-profit organization Helmets to Hard Hats. Since 2003, Helmets to Hard Hats has partnered with the Department of Defense, over 82,000 American businesses, and organized labor to help returning veterans prepare for and find work. The current unemployment rate for returning veterans under the age of 24 is an unacceptable 38%. Helmets to Hard Hats gives veterans the tools they need to start long-term careers in the construction trades. In 2008 alone, the organization placed nearly 1,800 military veterans into construction careers. Mr. Speaker, the last of our combat troops have left Iraq, and we're winding down our military operations in Afghanistan. These veterans put their lives on the line overseas and deserve the assistance of a grateful nation when they return to ensure that they can participate in the economy and into a lasting career. With that in mind, I congratulate Helmets to Hard Hats, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? The gentleman asks unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
I do, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. Mr. Speaker, there is an effort afoot to move Medicaid from a needs-based program to a block grant program. This, of course, by some estimates, would save approximately $180 billion. But the question is not really how much money will it save. The question is how many people will have their bodies healed by virtue of a reduction in the monies that would go to Medicaid. How many lives will be saved is the question we have to ask ourselves. In a country that is the richest in the world, the rich must pay their fair share of taxes so that all can benefit from the tax coffers and so that those who are poor, those who need health care, can get a fair amount of health care. I remind you again of what Kennedy said, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich.
Time of the gentleman has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we began today's session with a debate on contraception. It seems to pit the availability and access to care, which I believe is a fundamental right, versus whether you can legislate behavior of religious institutions. It seems like an intractable dilemma that we face, but that's not so. Mr. Speaker, look to Hawaii. Since the 1970s, Hawaii has led the way in terms of medical plans and medical provision. We have prepaid health care since then. And of course, as you can imagine, we've had this debate. We had this debate in 1999. And the way the state resolved it, and I was there was the religious exemption given for religious organizations broadly defined. But the employee is also entitled to buy coverage from the insurer at no extra cost. What does this mean? This means that it may have been maybe an additional $2 or $3 a month. But the reality of it is, Mr. Speaker, they didn't pay anything. The insurers covered it because they knew that was in the best interest. And guess what? Many of the religious organizations did not opt out. So don't speculate. See the reality. Look at Hawaii. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute. Response to consent by remarks.
Gentleman's recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize Career and Technical Education Month, and I'm proud to be able to work with my colleague G.T. Thompson of Pennsylvania, where he and I co-chair the Career and Technical Education Caucus. In particular, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to address the importance of the initiative that President Obama announced recently to support partnerships between community colleges and expanding industry. It should be a bipartisan priority. We've heard a lot about the skills gap that we're facing in this country, and business owners repeatedly tell me that they cannot fill openings because applicants lack necessary skills. Well, we need better collaboration between the companies doing business and doing the hiring and the educators who are preparing our students. In my district, National Grid, the primary utility, and the Community College of Rhode Island offer a model program to prepare workers for available high-skilled jobs. Through coursework and hands-on training, students receive a certificate in energy utility technology and can then become new employees. Unfortunately, community colleges simply can't afford enough of these programs. The President's Community College to Career Fund is a small price to pay for the resulting benefit.
It's a worthwhile program, and I believe that we need to support it. Mr. Speaker, there are some partisan differences this Congress perhaps cannot overcome, but the idea of multiplying this effort at our community colleges is a common sense goal if our goal is, in fact, to put Americans back to work. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California seek recognition? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, small businesses from used furniture stores to restaurants to barbershops drive our economy. But they've had to take a haircut recently, since they've been more subject to the ups and downs of the economy than perhaps anyone else. Just last week, I visited small businesses in the San Diego communities of Lemon Grove and Spring Valley, and people told me they need more customers walking in the door with money to spend. Well, increasing consumer demand is a key part of our recovery, but it won't come right away. Yet we can use a more immediate tool to help these businesses grow in the meantime. In the State of the Union address, the President mentioned 17 tax cuts for small businesses to put money in their pockets soon. Tax credits for hiring unemployed Americans and for health care costs will incentivize hiring and ensure that the Affordable Care Act is affordable for businesses to implement. An exemption from capital gains taxes for small business investments will spur small business spending and hiring. And the American Jobs Act has a provision which would reduce employers' contribution to the payroll tax for their employees. I support measures like these to encourage the growth of small businesses to reignite the American dream. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable the Speaker, House of Representatives, pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on February 16, 2012 at 9:48 a.m. that the Senate agreed to, without amendment, House Concurrent Resolution 99, Appointments, Washington's Farewell Address. With best wishes, I am, signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the chair will stand in recess subject to the call of the chair.
And we expect the House returning at about 3 p.m.